today we're going to take a look at political ideology. Now, political ideology is really just a consistent set of beliefs about policies that government ought to pursue. When we talk about political ideology, we're talking about what does a person believe in? And usually we're consistent with our beliefs. And when we elect officials, we usually elect officials who share our political ideology because we want them to carry out that same political ideology into legislation. Now, usually when we talk about political ideology, we're talking about liberal and conservative. And we have to have an understanding of what that means. So let's try to explain this today, and then I'll give you a number of examples. Let's start by putting liberal conservative on, I guess, a scale. Putting liberal on the left, because usually liberal is synonymous with the word left when we talk politics. And conservative on the right. Again, conservative and right, the word that's synonymous with conservative. And moderate, I guess, is in the middle. Now, when we say liberal and conservative, it's political beliefs. So as we list a bunch of political beliefs, you may say, well, yeah, that's me. That's me. Okay, so if you share a lot of these political beliefs, maybe that makes you liberal. If a lot of liberal beliefs. If you share a lot of conservative beliefs, I guess that makes you conservative. But what if you have some of the other? Or what if you don't feel as strongly about this stuff? Let's use an example let's use the abortion issue. We have pro-choice, which is a liberal belief, and we have pro-life, which is a conservative belief. It seems pretty straightforward. You're either liberal or conservative on this particular issue, except for not necessarily. Let's say that person number one, or person A, believes that abortion is a woman's right, and they themselves would have an abortion if they were put in that situation. That makes them very liberal. Put them on the liberal side here. But what if person B also believes that abortion is a woman's right to have? However, they themselves would never have an abortion. They're opposed to abortion for personal reasons, but believe it is still a woman's right to have an abortion. In that case, they're liberal on the idea, but they're not as liberal as person A. On the conservative side, let's say that person C is absolutely opposed to abortion for all reasons. It should never be allowed for any reason whatsoever. Person C is on the edge of the conservative scale. But person D is opposed to abortion, but would make exceptions if the health of the mother was at stake, or if the woman was made pregnant through rape. Well, person D is conservative, but maybe not as conservative on the issue as person C is. See, even on an issue as straightforward, as seemingly straightforward as abortion, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life, there could still be different degrees here. And sometimes it's unfair how we label people. We'll say you're liberal or you're conservative, and we assume that we know what that means, that we know everything about them. But in reality, we don't. We just have some idea. But if we are consistently liberal on our beliefs or consistently conservative, then we have a better idea of where we stand or where maybe elected officials stand. So what does it mean to be consistent? Well, when we look at liberal conservative, they're almost the exact opposite on everything. So we can look at liberal beliefs and conservative beliefs and get some idea of what they are, because they're always the opposite. For example, let's just start listing some things. So on the left side, we'll put liberal, on the right side, conservative. And we've already done the pro-choice, pro-life one. Another issue may be the death penalty. Liberals are against the death penalty, conservatives in favor of the death penalty. Now, if these are the only issues, and if you're both pro-life and for the death penalty, I guess you're conservative. But what if you're pro-life and against the death penalty? What does that make you? Well, maybe it makes you a moderate. But let's look at more issues. Same-sex issues, and we'll just use same-sex marriage. Liberals are more likely to allow same-sex marriage. Conservatives are more likely to be opposed to it. Another social issue might be legalization of marijuana. A couple of states have done this. A liberal might be more likely to legalize marijuana. A conservative would be more likely to oppose marijuana. Now, you may look at these four issues and say, I'm pro-choice and against the death penalty, but I'm also against same-sex marriage and against legalization of marijuana. You're not really consistent. You're not really conservative or liberal, and that's okay. That makes you more of a moderate. You know, or maybe you say, well, I'm for the legalization of marijuana, but only for medicinal purposes, not just for recreational use. Well, that puts you maybe in the closer to the center. You're leaning liberal on that issue, but you're not way over here. Let's look at some other issues. When it comes to religion in school or the greater separation of church and state, liberals are usually in favor of a greater separation of church and state, conservatives for less of a separation of church and state. When it comes to gun regulations, liberals, more gun regulations, conservatives, less gun regulations. Now, it's not necessarily fair to say pro-gun, anti-gun. I suppose on the very scale here, way on the edge, you could say that maybe a liberal right here would want all guns banned. But most liberals don't believe that. But most liberals may believe that there should be limitations. Maybe there's some types of guns that shouldn't be owned or things like that. On the conservative side, I guess way over here would be everybody deserves to have a gun, even people who are mentally unstable. But most conservatives don't believe that. They may believe that some gun regulations are allowed, just not very many. So it really becomes down to how much gun regulation. But certainly liberals would want more gun regulations, conservatives less. When it comes to free speech issues, and I just used the burning of the American flag as an example, conservatives are more likely to put some limitations on speech. Liberals are less likely to put limitations on speech. Again, both conservatives and liberals are very much in favor of free speech. It's just what kind of limitations should there be? When it comes to economic differences, liberals and conservatives see things opposite too. Sometimes we use the term big versus small government. Not always an economic term, but we can use it here. Liberals are usually for the government playing a bigger role in society. Maybe more regulations, more programs, things like that. Conservatives, less government. Not no government, but smaller government. Fewer regulations, fewer rules. So we can apply this to economic issues like welfare. Conservatives would want less welfare programs, such as food stamps. Liberals, more welfare programs, or more money towards food stamps, or an expansion of. I don't think it's fair to say that conservatives are anti-welfare. Maybe the ultra-conservative. But certainly conservatives would want less welfare. When it comes to taxes, conservatives would want taxes cut as low as possible because liberals want bigger government playing a bigger role in society, then they need more money to do that. So more taxes are required. When it comes to minimum wage, again, here's a good example of small versus big government. Big government or bigger government saying that we should have a minimum wage. And an increase in minimum wage, or keeping that minimum wage at a higher rate, is more of a liberal belief. Lowering or even eliminating minimum wage would be a conservative belief. When it comes to the workers themselves, liberals are more likely to take the side of workers and unions, where conservatives are more likely to take the side of the business owner. And if you look at the minimum wage thing, certainly raising a minimum wage may hurt business owners, but certainly would help workers. So this becomes consistent. So these are not the only issues, but these are examples of some issues. And when other issues come up, we can use these examples to help us try to figure out where liberals or conservatives would sit on those particular issues. A few other differences. When it comes to the environment, liberals are more likely to protect the environment more than conservatives are. Greater regulations to protect against pollution. Conservatives are not anti-environment, but are less likely to pass laws that will limit environmental or environmental protection laws, I should say. When it comes to military spending, conservatives are more likely to expand the military than liberals are. And especially in times of peace, you'll see this where conservatives still want to continue to spend more money on the military, expand it, where liberals may be more likely to reduce the size of the military. Healthcare, another example of bigger government versus smaller government. conservatives are more likely to oppose health care, a national health care law. Liberals are more likely to support a health care law. So these are just some examples. They're not the only issues out there, but notice on every example that liberals and conservatives are taking opposite views. Okay, so where do people sit in this? Well, according to a recent Gallup poll done in 2013, of all Americans, 38% say they're conservative. Another 34% say they're moderate, and 23% say they're liberal. This 23%, this is the highest it's been since they've started to measure conservative and liberal. But more people say they're conservative. There's a big chunk that fall in the middle that we call moderate. And let's look at that for a second. Back to this here. Let's get rid of these here. Back to here. If you were looking at these issues and you say, well, I'm liberal on this one. Say you just put in check marks besides all those issues I put. You're liberal on a lot of them and you're conservative on maybe a couple, but you're liberal on more. I guess then that makes you liberal. Certainly you lean on this side. And again, if you have more on the conservative side, then that would make you conservative. But what if you have some on each side? What if that some of your views are here, some of your views are here? You really don't have, you're not consistently liberal or you're not consistently conservative. Then I guess maybe that makes you a moderate. You're somewhere in the middle. Or let's say that you lean one way or the other, that on most of the issues you are conservative. But you're, again, if we put this on a scale, if you're very conservative on an issue, you'd be way over here. But let's say that on a lot of the issues, let's say you're here on one issue, but a lot of those issues, you're kind of here. You know, minimum wage, you think, well, I think minimum wage maybe should be raised a little bit, but not very much. So you put it right here. Environmental protections, you believe that businesses should have some rules, but very few. Maybe you're here on environmental stuff. Maybe you're kind of a moderate that leans conservative. Now, most of your ideals are pretty close to the center. They're right in here. But most of them are on the conservative side. So I guess that makes you a moderate that leans conservative some. So what does that mean when we look at political parties? Well, let's get rid of this here again. And there's lots of political parties, but political parties fall on this too. So let's say the Democratic Party is right here. Put D for Democrat. And let's put the Republican Party over here. Now, it is true that the Republican Party shares a lot of conservative beliefs, and it's true that the Democratic Party shares a lot of liberal beliefs. Well, there are other parties too. We could put the Green Party over here. That is certainly a more liberal party than the Democratic Party. And we could put the Constitution Party here, which is a more conservative party than the Republican. There are lots of political parties, and for the most part, we can put them on the scale. But the only two that really win elections very often are the Democrats and Republicans. So for today, let's just talk about those two. Republicans tend to be conservative. So if you are conservative, if you were going through our list of things and you were saying, you know, I'm here and here and here and here and here, then it makes sense for you to be a Republican, or at least vote for a Republican candidate, because they will share that same political ideology. However, if your views were over here, then again, it makes sense that you would choose the Democratic candidate. Democrats tend to be more liberal. So we can get some kind of prediction on what type of legislation will pass based on looking at, are there more Democrats or Republicans in Congress? It gives us some idea if they're more liberal or more conservative. And you want to, in a democracy, you want to vote for people who share your political ideology. Problem is, a lot of us are moderates. A lot of Americans are moderate. Let's go back to this again, and let's look at the political parties here. When it comes to political parties, in that same poll, Democrats, 43% of Democrats classify themselves as liberal. Another 36% of Democrats classify themselves as moderate, and then 19% say they're conservative. On the Republican side, 70% of Republicans classify themselves as conservative, 23% moderate, and 5% liberal. So there are some, if you notice this, some moderate Democrats and some moderate Republicans. Most Republicans are going to be conservative. More often than not, most Democrats are going to be liberal. When we look at independents, people that have not chosen a party, most independents say that they are moderates. But 35% of independents say they're conservative, 20% say liberal. It's not an absolute, you can't say that, well, moderates are going to be an independent. You could be a conservative moderate, you could be or Republican moderate or Democratic moderate. But it is true to say that if you're a conservative, you're more likely to be Republican. If you are liberal, you're more likely to be Democrat. If you're moderate, you're more likely to be. Hopefully this gives us a little bit better understanding of liberal and conservative.